Welcome to episode 11 of the Hot Path Show. My name is Johnny, and I'm joined here by Danny. Welcome in, Danny. How's it going today?
I would say good. I would say good.
You would say? What do you mean by
Yeah,
that?
no. It's been a long day, but I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to show what I have to show today.
Well, hey, yeah, glad to have you in here. Why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of a preview of what you're going to be showcasing in our main section of today's video?
Yes, today I'll be showcasing this little project here where not only do I have multiple controllers recognized and displaying, you can exit and you can join and you can say whether or not you're ready. When everyone is ready, go in game and it will figure out how to set up the multiple cameras, how to set up multiple players, how to map the camera to a Dutch character. So we're both spawning entities, we're spawning some game objects, and having everything work and remapping correctly. And you can join and exit as much as you want. And yeah, and also obviously it recognized, if you guys saw, both the PlayStation controller versus the Xbox controller and so on. It's so cool. So that's the ideas for today.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm very much looking forward to it. We do have a couple other kind of sections that we want to get through first. By the way, we do have a new kind of little scrolling thing going across the bottom, kind of giving us a little kind of insight on what the schedule for today's show is going to be like. I think I would like to get some kind of nicer graphics at some point, but I think this will be good. Just kind of for the time being. But yeah. So I want to kind of get through a couple of these fun little sections relatively quickly so we can give Danny plenty of time here today to showcase the local multiplayer setup because, there is a lot of really cool things with that. So once again, welcome in everybody to the Hot Path Show. Very excited to be here with y'all today. So we're just going to start off with a couple of quick miscellaneous announcements. So coming up next Wednesday, that's going to be April 10th, Tobias's game, Just Read the Instructions, is going to be launching, which is very exciting. I know he's been working on that for a number of years now. I think going back to 2019 is when he kind of started it. And so, if you haven't seen, I probably should have had a thing up on it, but it's a cooperative multiplayer game built off of Unity's data-oriented technology stack and a custom netcode solution that he built out. And so he's going to be on the show next Friday talking all about his game, Just Read the Instructions. Definitely go ahead and look forward to that. And then also I did want to call out that I guess this is the week after next. Unity, actually here we go. We can just give a quick little preview for people on Just Read the Instructions here. So this is a game. You can see that it's made with Unity's dots and ECS, and there's large numbers of enemies, and you kind of have to fight through those with friends and complete different fun little tasks. So I'm very much looking forward to playing it. I haven't actually played it myself, but definitely going to be an exciting one. Okay, and then after that, I did want to mention that Unity is hosting another DOTS webinar in the coming weeks here. So it's going to be on April 17th at 9 a.m. Pacific. I think they kind of got a little bit of feedback from the previous one that they did, and I can actually showcase this here. I think they got a little bit of feedback from the previous kind of webinar that they did about just kind of, making sure that everyone's expectations were set correctly with, the intended audience for the webinars and kind of what they'll be going over and everything like that. So it sounds like rather than kind of like a week-long series of webinars, this is just going to be kind of like a single one-off one. Again, this is going to be on Wednesday, April 17th at 9 a.m. Pacific. And then basically what they're saying in here is how to convert a game to dots. So basically taking an existing game object project and analyzing some performance bottlenecks, and then kind of using ECS, the job system, to kind of solve some of those performance issues. So it doesn't say how long that it's going to be, but I would just kind of expect this to be kind of like a little bit of a one-off webinar. Danny, do you know anything about this webinar at all?
Well, I know about it and might even join it, but
Cool.
I don't know how long it's going to be, and I don't know the format. So
Gotcha.
we're all learning.
Sounds good. And then they did point out specifically in here, Yeah, this says this session is intended for experienced programmers with little or no pre-existing dots knowledge, so it's a good opportunity to get familiar with the tech. And then, yeah, they say what they're going to cover. So again, they're just kind of setting their expectations this time around. I think they got a good amount of feedback from the previous one that they did. And then they said that basically a week after, it's kind of interesting how they're doing this, like a week after, on April 24th at the same time, then they're going to be doing a kind of live Q&A on Unity's Twitch channel. So that will be kind of interesting that they kind of have it split apart a little bit, but yeah, we'll see how that all goes. So yeah, you can just go ahead and register this. I'll go ahead and post a link in the chat where you can register that, register for that. And then actually, so after you sign up, they kind of bring you to this like learn with data-oriented design with these resources page to just give you kind of like some of Unity's kind of learning and documentation about their, templates and samples and everything like that. And they had this set up for like the previous webinar. And they featured my channel as like a community resource, and for some reason this is the video that they picked. Just this ridiculous thumbnail that I created. New ECS who dis?
I mean, someone must have liked it.
Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of a random one because this is like one where I'm going over one of the new Dots updates, the Dots 1.1 update. But yeah, it's funny that they chose that one. But yeah, it's super cool that they put me as part of the kind of some of the community learning resources here for that. Okay, so next up in our kind of miscellaneous announcements category, did want to let you know that the Unity Asset Store is hosting another new sale right now. This is the $20 sale. So basically there's like over 150 assets available for $20 a piece. There's definitely some really cool assets in here. I don't know, Dan, have you seen this guy, Gabriel Aguar, before? He has a YouTube channel where he does a lot of stuff with like VFX graph and...
Feels familiar.
Yeah, he does a lot of really cool videos, and he also sells kind of some of his more complex assets on the asset store. So this is a full big pack of projectiles that he has part of the sale. It's this mega pack normally goes for $64, and again just going for $20. So yeah, I would recommend these. He's a great resource if you're kind of like want to learn VFX graph, and if you want to get some kind of the more kind of the ones that he kind of like designed to be more like to work in a game. I would definitely check out some of his asset packs. So this one is part of it as well. And another cool one that I found is this VHS Pro one. It's mostly just kind of like some shader effects that you can kind of put on your game, and it makes it look like it's running on kind of like a old VHS or CRT TV. Which I think is kind of cool, especially if you're making like a horror game or something like that, and you can kind of mess around with like the coloring. And so yeah, if you're kind of making some game that wants to have a little bit of that old school style, would definitely recommend checking that out. And let me just actually go ahead and get the links to these assets so I can post these in the chat here as well. But yeah, so please do go ahead and check that out. And then I can go ahead and take this off. And then, yeah, just wanted to remind you that if you do want to support our show and what we're doing over here, we do have a Patreon that you can support over at patreon.com/turbomakesgames. And we do have, special bonus videos available to all supporters. Just put up one that was kind of like my GDC recap vlog, where I basically just kind of like talked through everything that I was doing throughout the week on GDC and kind of showed some pictures and videos about, all my experiences. So it's kind of a cool little, behind the scenes look at some of the stuff that I did during the week. And then for some of our higher tiers, we do also have like a Q&A, a monthly Q&A one. Didn't get any questions on the little question thing that I put out this month, so ended up just kind of doing like a little bit of a rant about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because I had mentioned last week that I recently just got promoted to purple belt, so I thought it would just be like kind of a nice, fun little time to reflect and just kind of talk about why I train jujitsu, why I love it so much, and why I continue to train. And hopefully it inspires you to maybe train jujitsu or even do just kind of something else that just kind of challenges you and pushes you outside your comfort zone. So yeah, you can go ahead and check that out. I also did another video about some of the software that I use on my computer if you want to learn about some of the cool tools and stuff on there. And of course, we'll be continuing to put out monthly bonus episodes and have some voting on some upcoming topics as well. Those things are available to all supporters. So I'll have a little bit more specific details about some of the things for this month in the coming weeks here. So anyways, with all that out of the way, we can go ahead and get into our first kind of main section of the show, where we're going into the prefetch, which is our warm-up topic of the week. So yeah, today I just kind of wanted to do a little bit of a fun kind of game development related topic and just ask, so Danny, what was the first game that you ever made? So this would basically be like, something that you're not necessarily following like a, direct tutorial on, but it's kind of like your first step of like, making an actual game project. So do you remember what that is, and tell us about it?
I mean, I remember. Well, first off, I've never really been one to stick to a guide. So the first game was also when I started. I remember the first one being something in Game Maker. I think I was really into physics at the time, so it was a game about atoms. So you played as this little guy that moved around collecting atoms, and then you had a inventory. And I vividly remember, because this was so I by the way, did have prior programming knowledge before starting to make my first game. So it wasn't coming from nothing. But I just remember spending like a month just to get a character working, and oh my god, did he fly everywhere. Like as soon as you pressed jump, he would randomly just fly infinitely. Falling would means he kept falling out of yeah, there was so many things wrong with that. Then I ported that to Unity, and same problems. Then I came up with a new game idea, and that was initially in Unity. Then we ported that to Unreal. Then I was into Unreal for a while, and that never got anywhere because I had no idea what I was doing. And yeah, no, that was my start. I just remember liking atoms and wanting to make a game about that. And then the next game was one where it was about building dungeon fights, like a boss fight.
Okay, cool.
What about yourself?
Yeah, so I kind of have like two answers to this. One would be, yeah, kind of like the first thing that I made just kind of like on my own that was, kind of like still I would consider a complete project. And then the other one would be like my first published game. And so these are both games that I made in college. I didn't have a whole lot of like kind of programming experience before college. Like, I mean, I kind of like looked into some things a little bit, but it wasn't really till college and I started like taking classes on it that I, really started actually like making things. And then so, of course I wanted to do like game dev stuff. So, started kind of like following along with some Unity tutorials. And then during one of the classes, we had to kind of like create a full game. It was like a team of 3 people, I believe. And so I was like, okay, I kind of like understand the basics. I know like what a prefab is. I know what a variable is and how to, put it on a mono behavior and all this. I think I got this down. Like, let me go ahead and make a multiplayer first-person shooter as my first game.
Yeah, no, so, mine was the same with roguelike. That dungeon boss game was a roguelike.
Nice.
And obviously in third person because 3D and yeah, no.
Yeah.
Way old school.
Yeah. So I actually ended up finding a tutorial series online by somebody who people may or may not recognize, but kind of someone who used to do a lot more kind of Unity tutorial videos. It was this guy called Quill18 Creates. And he had kind of like a tutorial series using the Photon networking solution to make a basically first-person shooter type game. So I kind of followed along with a lot of that, but then was also kind of like building out some other things around it. The game was called A Mandatory Vengeance. And it was basically just kind of like, it was similar to like Quake or something like that, where it was like, first person, but there's a lot of kind of like platforming elements, and the idea was basically like you would kind of do more challenging platforming obstacles to get to like better weapons, but those kind of like going through that platforming section, it might kind of like leave you exposed to getting shot by other players. So the idea was to kind of have like a little bit of like risk reward type balance in there. But yeah, it was a fun little project, and I did get kind of the multiplayer working with Photon, which was super cool.
Damn.
And then my actual first release project was another one that I did in college. This one was like a team of 4, and we did like specifically a mobile development class. And then it was like basically the whole semester we were kind of like working on this game. We were prototyping it and developing it in Unity and everything. So that one was called Badass McLarge Huge, and it was basically this like kind of like auto runner type game where it's just kind of like a 2D kind of Super Mario Brothers style, where the player is just kind of like automatically running across the screen by itself, and then you basically just have like a jump button, so you can like jump over gaps and enemies and stuff, and then you can also basically tap on enemies to shoot them. And then there's like different weapons in the game, and then the different weapons basically just have like different like ammo counters, and then kind of the main difference is pretty much every enemy I think was just like a one-hit kill kind of thing. But then like once you run out of bullets, it takes like a couple seconds to like reload. So yeah, it was kind of another cool one. Yeah, we actually did release that one on the Google Play Store, which I was super excited to get a game out there. So those are
I've
kind of
never
my
done
two first games.
I was also reminded of my first Ludum Dare, my first game jam.
Okay.
Because
What
I actually do have
what
it
Ludum Dare
online.
number was
still.
it?
That's a good question. We can see. It was 32. I don't know how high they are at this point.
That was before the first one that I did.
It was back when I was 15. 2015.
Nice.
Clearly before Unity supported WebGL. This is the web player plugin. And then the next game jam I did was Pack It Down, which was a few years later. Also, this game you can clearly tell that I don't really know what I was doing already at this point. But you can play it. So if anyone wants to play it, dexo.itch.io, which is kind of fun that my old projects are up online for people to try.
Yeah.
This was like a game
cool
where you had to put things in a basket.
Can live in perpetuity like that.
Some fun physics. And then... yeah, that's that.
Sweet.
Definitely wasn't using dots back then, but there are dots games in there.
No.
And there's also source code for those dots games, if anyone is curious.
Ooh. All right. Well, yeah. Do you have anything else to say about memories from your first game at all?
No. I just remember starting very rough for many years, and then at some point, because I kept teaching game development before actually having any idea about how game development, then I started learning very rapidly. So, yeah.
It is amazing how much teaching helps for. I know I can speak for myself saying teaching helps a lot for my own learning process and just kind of understanding things at a much deeper level, and allows me to kind of use it in production much better after I've taught something.
Yeah. I'm definitely the same there. I mean, in a way, that's why I'm doing this show.
Same here. All right. Well, we can go ahead and move on to the error correction code, where we can kind of bring up corrections from previous episodes. So if we ever get anything incorrect or you want to provide any additional context, feel free to just leave that in the comments below and we can kind of address that. This one is not so much a correction, but it's just kind of a little bit of an expansion of what we talked about last time, where we kind of brought up the IL2 CPP build times, where I got a comment on a video saying that, during development, they basically disabled IL2 CPP just so they could kind of have like much faster iteration times. And then, when they went to make a final project, then they would actually build it out with IL2 CPP. So just kind of as a little bit of a test, I had mentioned that the Netcode for Entities project that I did that big, almost 6-hour long tutorial on, it was pretty much like every time I wanted to make a build of that game, it took anywhere between like 3 to 5 minutes for making builds. It didn't matter if it was like a clean build or an incremental build with just some small code changes. It was pretty much 3 to 5 minutes every single time. So did a little bit of timing on that project just to see, doing a mono build, how long that would take. So for a clean mono build, it was taking between 90 and 120 seconds. So, I mean, that's like basically less than half.
Did you turn burst off there?
No, I still had burst on.
Okay, so that's probably burst taking most of that.
Okay. Yeah. You had mentioned that that you could turn off burst and build. So I should do another test for next episode to see
Yes.
how long that would be. But yeah, that again is clean builds, and then incremental builds were about 60 seconds. So I would assume that incremental builds would probably be significantly less there by disabling burst.
Yeah, and to anyone curious, you can do that right in here. So inside the project settings, there's the burst AOT settings, and then enable burst compilation off.
Okay.
This will turn it off in builds.
Gotcha.
Because normally it's on in builds, even if you have it all, off in here. Turning this off doesn't mean it's off in builds.
Right.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay. So yeah, then we can move over into our cache hit Unity Dots quick tip of the week. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Do this entire screen. So yeah, I just wanted to call out something that probably a lot of you know, but maybe there's some people who aren't aware of this or don't necessarily know some of the good use cases for it. But I did just want to talk about the disable auto creation attribute, because it is one that I kind of use quite a bit, especially during debugging. So basically all you do is, for any system, this works for both iSystems as well as system bases, is right above it you can just do a disable auto creation attribute just like that. And then basically what that means is that this system just never gets initialized or created within the game world. Now this is super handy for debugging, because if you are kind of maybe having some issues and you are suspecting that there's maybe some systems that could be causing this issue, one of the first things that I do is I just do a disable auto creation on some of the individual systems, because ideally I try to have each system do its own kind of separate thing, its own separate job. So that things are kind of, a little bit easier to kind of, plug and play. I've mentioned that I kind of rely on this quite heavily when I do things like the combat system, so that, things aren't necessarily all super intertwined with each other. So it's easy enough to just kind of say, disable a system, and then I can see if maybe that issue is still happening. If it is still happening, then I know that, this system is okay for now. But if it stops that, then obviously I can kind of investigate a little bit deeper into kind of what's going on in this system here. It also really helps for if you're doing kind of some refactoring, where if you wanted to say I have this move ability system, if I wanted to create a different version of this move ability system that maybe I think is has better performance, or some other advantages, like it supports some additional features that I want to add in that this initial system just can't support because of how I initially created it. Well, what I can do is I can just say disable this system, and then I can create this new movability system, and then have that one basically be the active system, and I can test that out. And then once it's in kind of a working state, then I can just kind of use this disable auto creation tag, just put it on whichever system that I want to toggle off at that time, and then I can kind of do kind of some more or less side-by-side comparisons. Now, there are other ways that you can kind of enable and disable systems a little bit more in real time to really switch back and forth between the two. But this is just like a super simple, one-line thing that you can put above any system to, just basically disable it so it just never gets created in the first place. And then even if you had any like on create logic, like none of that's going to be running at all. So it is a quite handy tool that I use quite a bit. Danny, I'm sure you probably use this quite a bit from time to time for probably similar things, right?
I mean, that and the fact that if you want to manually be able to control the creation of a system, like for instance, say you wanted to have a system only run when a scene has loaded, then you can put that there and then you can create the system once.
Yes, yeah, that's a great point. Just to have that kind of more manual control over when the system creates, because again, if there is some logic that you want to happen in the on create system, that you want to run at a specific point, then you again can kind of have more control over actually creating that system. And then I guess we should just probably show real quick how to create a system if we're just kind of mentioning that here. So what do you just use a entity manager?
State.entity manager, yeah. Create success. No, I guess it's the world actually. So you do a world dot state dot world. Yeah. Create.
Yeah, system. Create system. And then you can just we'll just say this movability system, just like that. And then you can basically just do that anywhere that you have access to the world. And so you could even do this from a mono behavior if you're say accessing like the default game object injection world if you wanted to.
Yeah. Important thing to note here is that there's then also nothing that tells it to. I think in this case there is. I think it will get plopped into the correct prediction simulation system group. But if that's not the case, because I'm not entirely sure here, then there's
so you're
a way
saying
for you to saying.
You're saying you're unsure that if I do this like this, that it will go in the correct update group, and if I had any update ordering specified.
That part I cannot remember if it does.
Okay.
But I think there's a good chance it won't, and in that case you need to find the prediction simulation system group first, and then put it in there. You can do like an add system on a system group.
Okay, interesting.
But maybe we can just put that as an error correction next time.
Yeah, I'll make a note to go ahead and research that for next time. Okay, so after that, we can go ahead and move over into our context switch. So today I wanted to go ahead and talk about, I should go ahead and put up the correct screen here. So I wanted to just kind of briefly talk about the Latios framework, which is kind of an additional framework that kind of like is kind of an extension of a lot of the Unity ECS feature sets created by a community member called Dreaming I'm Latios. And basically this person has a quite extensive library that is kind of complementary to Unity ECS. There's kind of a lot of additional things that you can use in conjunction with a lot of the things that Unity ECS provides, as well as kind of in replacement to what Unity ECS provides. So kind of just wanted to just give like a quick overview, let people know what this is about. Also just kind of wanted to use this as a point to kind of gauge people's interest in the Latios framework in general, if they want to see kind of more videos about this, about me, maybe just kind of showing how to use it, how to set it up, just kind of my thoughts on how it's used and everything like that. To be clear, I don't have any development experience with using the Latios framework. I haven't like tried it out or anything myself. I've just kind of read through a couple things about it on the forums, and it seems interesting. It seems like there's a lot of cool features in it. So again, just kind of wanted to showcase these a little bit here, and just tell you all about them, and then again, just kind of gauge people's interest on the topic overall. But Danny, do you have any experience using the Latios framework, or even just kind of looking at some of the features that are kind of
Not really,
available
but
from it?
I mean, Dreaming on Latios is very good at putting feedback on the forums, and we always read that. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, we definitely recognize his work and the research he puts into it, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just kind of speaking of that, this is kind of like some of the documentation that this user has kind of provided along with his own framework, and it goes pretty deep. There's a lot of things here. Again, this is just kind of like a good high level overview of it, but each of their own different features, they're all well documented. Everything's laid out very clearly. So I think as far as like an additional kind of framework to use in conjunction with ECS, this seems to be probably one of the more kind of approachable solutions, in my opinion. Again, just kind of looking at it and not having much development experience with it. So yeah, anyways, just kind of like showing, this is just kind of like a little overview about, some of the modules that this has. So there's the core module, and I kind of want to talk about some of the core module things a little bit later. So I'll go into that in a second. But there's also kind of a different transform system that can be used that kind of, again, it gives some additional features that are not necessarily easily supported with Unity ECS. And from my understanding, there's also some major performance benefits as well. There's their own physics library called SciShock. So it sounds like this is less of a full replacement for a actual physics library, but it really kind of gives you an easy way to do spatial queries. And so I think this is kind of an interesting approach because, at least again, my kind of limited understanding of this is, if you don't necessarily need the full overhead of a whole physics library, but you just kind of need to do basic things, again, kind of like spatial querying, where you're maybe just doing some basic collision and trigger checking, to see when things are overlapping, or if you want to like select a bunch of units in a certain area, then this is kind of a good solution for that, because again, you don't necessarily have all the overhead of doing crazy physics calculations, but it still gives you enough to have kind of like fast and efficient spatial querying, so you can kind of, again, detect when things overlap, or select units in kind of a larger area. So I think that's kind of a good thing. There's Miri, which is kind of an ECS audio solution, where it has kind of features 3D spatialization for looping and non-looping audio sources, multiple listeners, directional and non-directional sources, and you can support massive amounts of sources playing at once. I think I even read somewhere else that it was supporting thousands and thousands of audio sources. I think was it the original Megacity demo had kind of its own ECS audio solution?
It definitely did. It had a bunch of specialized things in the original demo, which is why the new demo is such a big improvement. Like a lot of people ask, oh, why are they doing Megacity again? A lot of the old one had a bunch of customization hacks, etc. Whereas the new one is saying, this is what you can do out of the box with the tools that we provide. There's no like custom solutions you have to do for audio and so on.
Yeah.
It's all built.
That's a nice point. And then they do have their own animation and rendering framework in here that has a completely overhauled entities graphics for significantly improved performance for skin mesh and non-skinned meshes. It sounds like there's quite a bit of improvements here. Again, it does support full animations. So it would be interesting to at least, at the very minimum, do a little bit of kind of comparison to see how Kinemation lines up with some of the other ECS animation solutions that are available. So the next up is I don't know how like this is actually pronounced, but I think
Calligraphy.
it's calligraphy merged with graphics, so calligraphics.
Calligraphics. Yeah, that doesn't sound too hard. Calligraphics. I was spelling
I don't
hierarchy
know
the
why I'm
entire
having so
day.
much trouble with it. What?
Hierarchy is a lot harder to spell. I was having trouble the entire day. I was trying to spell hierarchy and I failed every time.
HYR.
Yeah, no, it's the middle bit. It's so hard.
Yeah. That's a confusing one even for a native English speaker. So yeah, this is a world text or world space text rendering module. So this is kind of interesting. So if you want to, you could use this for, world space dialogue, player names, damage numbers. As I was reading through this, there's actually some projects that I've had worked on in the past and am now working on now that I think could really take advantage of having a much more efficient world space text rendering, especially for large numbers of things. So again, this would be interesting to see how this lines up with some of the other solutions that I had in place there. Mimic, let's see, this provides behavioral replicas of popular solutions within the Unity ecosystem, rewritten to leverage the features of other modules and performance benefits of ECS. With Mimic, teams can continue to use familiar and proven authoring tools and workflows while simultaneously being fully invested into Unity ECS and the Latios framework.
There's really a lot here. Holy shit.
yeah, it goes really deep.
It would be lovely if we could have him on Sunday and maybe show off a demo.
That would be incredible. So yeah, then some Mechanim. I guess basically you can kind of use Mechanim to maybe author some things with the animation framework. Yeah. And then he also recently put up a video just kind of doing a performance comparison between the two solutions. Let me go ahead and grab the link to this here. Get ink. So if anyone wants to go ahead and check out that video, there's no audio in it, but it's basically just kind of like going through the kind of like a couple of different like demos and experiments here, kind of showing the performance differences between them all. And in general, the Latios framework has came on top for the ones that they were showcasing there. Anyways, you can just kind of install it basically through GitHub. You can clone the submodule into your packages folder, or even just do a add package from Git URL. So yeah, that's kind of a high level overview of it. And I do want to just kind of maybe dive deep, not dive deep, but go a little bit more into some of the other things here. So this is on the GitHub. This is kind of like a good overview about what some of the different modules are kind of used for. So this is what parts of ECS does the Latios framework changed. And then, basically this just kind of goes over a lot of like the theory behind the Latios framework. Again, they say most of this is some like opt-in type stuff. So it's, even though that some of the features are, very opinionated, you don't necessarily need to use all of them. Again, they're kind of opt-in, and most of them can be kind of used in conjunction with Unity ECS. But if you want, you can use only the Latios framework stuff and just kind of ignore some of the Unity ECS stuff. And so they basically say, I'm a beginner, should I start using this? So they just kind of say, if you're completely brand new, you want to, kind of familiarize yourself with jobs, burst, entities, basic entity operations. But then, they said, if you're at that level, then you're well equipped to start leveraging the framework. Never hesitate to ask questions in the Discord and all that. And then, this kind of just goes over some of the other kind of features and when you might want to use them. And then, they show kind of more some of the more like advanced stuff kind of down at the bottom. Again, I think the documentation is pretty well laid out, so there's a lot of good stuff in here. So the last kind of thing that I wanted to really chat about for this is just kind of going over some of the features in the Latios framework's core. Because again, I do think the core module does have kind of some great quality of life improvements to again kind of help your ECS programming a little bit here. So let's take a look here. So yeah, there's some additional bootstrapping tools, explicit top-down hierarchical system ordering. So this is kind of an interesting one that I would like to experiment with a little bit, because this is basically, from my understanding, is it's kind of like an alternate to using the update before and update after attributes. And then just kind of, it says, would you rather just see the systems ordered explicitly in your code within the group as they do in editor windows? So then this kind of uses some different top-down hierarchical system ordering.
It looks a lot like if you've ever played around with Bevy. I mean, you did have that video with a guy on Bevy, and then you doing a lot of... Yeah. But in Bevy, you do explicitly have to state what systems are being run, and they have this concept of plugins where a plugin runs a set of systems. I'm sure there's something similar there. It definitely looks a lot like the Bevy setup.
Yeah. So that would be cool to look into. Conditional system updates. So this kind of gives you a little bit more control about when systems update. There are, like, they kind of mentioned that there are some ways that you can do it in Unity by default, but they've kind of like expanded upon that a little bit there. I guess they have this concept of super systems, which I haven't really looked into too much, but that would be kind of interesting as well.
Maybe that's like a plugin from Bevy.
Maybe. The one thing that I found really interesting was this concept of blackboard entities, which seems very similar to the solution that Tobias came up with and showed us a couple weeks ago about, I called them the super singletons, where basically, one of the issues with singletons in Unity ECS is if you just have, each singleton with just one single component on it, then, as this says, this lives in its own 16 kilobyte mansion. These singletons are so spoiled, it says. Instead of allocating a full chunk for just, a singleton that has, one component on it, this concept of a blackboard entity is basically they have two entities by default. There's one blackboard entity associated with each world, and then one blackboard entity associated with each scene. So that, every time that like a scene is changed, then that scene blackboard entity basically gets destroyed and respawned. And then these blackboard entities, they can just kind of exist as like a target entity for you to put any data that you might need shared between multiple systems. They do a lot of interesting optimizations around those and everything, which I think is quite fascinating here. There's additional scene management tools, which I think is good.
Do you know how much of this is like plug and play as well? Like, can you just take one of these? What is essentially like a title? So manage struct components. Can I take that and not have to implement all of the other part of the framework? Or do I need the entire framework every time that I want a piece of it?
So yeah, my understanding of it is like if you want this, you'd probably would need like the core kind of module installed. But it sounds like a lot of the stuff is kind of like disabled by default. And then most of the stuff is just kind of opt-in.
Well, then I have someone... something like this, but that is more modular for the next context. Next time we do a context switch. I'm on a context switch. Yeah.
Sounds good to me. Well, looking forward to it. Some additional math libraries, extensions, fluent queries. So I'm guessing this is just kind of like a different way to, say your entity queries. Additional smart sync points and custom command buffers. So yeah, I mean, again, this goes very deep. So there's RNG for a better, kind of more reliable random number generation.
A
That
whole
is
toolkit.
deterministic, parallel, low bandwidth. The whole toolkit, the RNG
That
toolkit.
does scare me in a way, because I don't know. I don't like the word toolkit. That sounds like a big thing for something that feels very simple, which is RNG.
Yeah. But yeah, it is interesting because they're saying that it's completely deterministic across different threads and jobs and everything. So there's additional ways that you can kind of check if entities have, I guess, a special component, smart blobbers for again, additional things to blob assets, unsafe parallel block list, dynamic hash map. So I guess this is this is a wrapper around dynamic buffer where you can get hash map like functionality from it. Then they have some additional things on the roadmap as well. So again, this is just the core module, and then kind of going back to this thing here, there's still a bunch of other modules: the transform, physics, animation, world space, UI, all kinds of things. So I mean, yeah, this has been in development for a while. This is quite extensive. Again, very well documented. It's all completely free to use. So yeah, I think it's interesting. Again, just kind of wanted to gauge people's interest on it and see what they thought of it, and if they would want to see maybe a little bit more content surrounding it, because I certainly would like to experiment around with it myself.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we move on, do we want to take a couple questions? I saw that there were a couple things.
Yeah,
in the chat
like
that...
let's start with the this one, which is an answer to something you were talking about. We were talking about just a little ago, which is someone when they create a system, they get the group and then create the system and add it to that group, and that they normally do that from a mono behavior, because a mono behavior, I would assume, likely because a mono behavior is run when the scene loads.
The scene's loaded, yeah. Or even if you have like maybe some UI controls to do some action, and then you want the scene to get created, or system to get created.
Yeah. And there's a snippet for anyone curious.
Nice. So I do see, is it easy to convert from netcode for game objects to netcode for entities? I would say probably not easy. I mean, it's kind of a whole completely different rethinking of your project and restructuring of things. So yeah, I mean, the netcode models are completely different right now. I know they do say at some time that they want to do this whole netcode unification, where the netcode for entities and netcode for game objects are kind of like the same thing.
Exactly.
But that's not the case right now. They're completely separate things.
They very much are very different, but they want to unify it to just be one thing, or and have the features merged, so it's very easy to go from one to the other in the beginning, and then see.
Awesome. That sounds great to me. Well, at this time we can move over to our instruction set here, and let me just actually set the correct title, and I'll let you go ahead and take it away.
Yes. And just so people remember, nice little menu, and we can have X number of players, and that's what we're looking at today. And obviously this is also just exemplifying that it works in builds, and you can exit and join, and let's see how it works in a game. Actually, let me go out there. So the main thing I obviously want to cover today is just the simplest approach to input and figuring out how to connect multiple controllers with multiple players and assign them correctly, so that when a new player joins and they pick up a controller, that controller gets mapped correctly, and when they, let's say the controller disconnects and or loses power, then it should also remap that when you give it power again. It should correctly, re-enable the controller to the right player. And so I put on the GitHub, this time this is the only thing I put on the GitHub, this smallest section of code that you need in order for this to work. I'll go through it in a second. I'll also just mention that this was built based on the subject of last time that I was talking about ECS code and not what were we doing last week? That was...
we did the DOS Community Challenge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is the episode 9 of creating a character controller.
Yeah.
And that's why the project looks very similar. But this time I moved and changed the characters a little, because then I get multiple skins. But more about that later.
Let's dig into character.
Let's dig into what this code is, because this is definitely the hardest part of making a Dutch game work. To anyone that has ever worked with the new input system before, you might know that it can be kind of, it's very game object oriented by default. Mm-hmm. Like the default approach that is recommended is you create a game object, you put something on it called player input, and that becomes your game object, and then you have another game object. So this is your prefab that you're going to spawn, and then you have another thing called the player input manager, and this is the join behavior, and then you set up things with that. And I don't quite know how this one is meant to work. I don't like this in particular. I just want the simplest thing, especially for DOS, because creating game objects quickly gets very difficult to understand. But underlying what's it called, the player manager that we just saw, actually there is an API for it, and it was created based on this API. It's called input user, which is a static class so that you can just access as part of the input system. And you can ask it to listen for a specific amount of unpaired devices. And then there's also another thing called unpaired device used, which obviously anytime you press a button on a device that have not been paired yet, this will get called. And it will, give the control, which tells you the button that you pressed on that unused device. And then once you've, done all this handling, then you say, hey, yeah, you should listen for one list. This essentially, in a way, indicates that you're listening. You successfully managed to create a pairing because you're listening for one list, right? Well, how do you then pair up a device so you don't keep calling this event? Well, this is what you need to do. Combine, actually, this call in particular. And we have a few if statements before this, because by default, all controls go in here. So if I start moving my mouse around, this event gets triggered by my mouse. If I start moving the analog stick, and I think even just moving my controller, because there's a gyroscope in some of those controllers. Yeah. Therefore, I'm making sure that I'm exiting out of any buttons, and I also don't want the mouse, because a mouse and a keyboard actually count as two separate devices. And what I'm doing down here is simply making sure that...
Yeah, I hear you now.
Okay, yeah, my cat just ripped out my cable. So I just wanted to make sure. But so essentially, if we press something on the keyboard, remembering that no mouse events get caught, then we should also find the mouse, which we do here, and then we pair that with the same user. So the same user gets two devices in this case. And how do we create a user? Well, when we do input user.perform pairing with device, it automatically creates a user. There's another function you can use if you don't want to pair a device when you create a new user, but this is the default one you can use. And so now you've paired a new user, and you probably want to make sure that you have like a controller set up that actually uses that. So if you new up a Kyle input, which if you remember last time, I had something, an input asset here, and you can say generate C# class. Like this is the input asset with some events on it.
Yep.
If I generate the C# class, then I get this little class, and this is what is generating in the Kyle input class, because I put in Kyle input here. Last time it was Kyle. I should probably have renamed this to player input or something. Demo input. hero input. I think hero is the most normal for the main characters. But yeah, so like any normal input system setup, you just new it up and enable it so that we start listening to events on this controller. But obviously, by default, when you just do this alone, it will listen. This player controller will listen for all events. So whether my PlayStation controller or Xbox controller, etc., I press that, an event is called from this and read value and so on. So I want to make sure that this is filtered to only match the controller. And I can do this through the user. So I can associate this specific controller with the user. And because the user is already associated with the device, that means that now this player controller only gets events when the matching device is used. So you sort of now have a setup where the user is in control of the devices, and there's a one-to-one mapping, which is awesome. And
again, that's just to basically make sure that each controller is only controlling the player they're associated with, right?
Exactly. And this also makes sure that if I disconnect my controller and connect it again, then it should be assigned to the same user.
It should map to the same user. Nice.
Exactly. And that's why you want to do it this way. Because if you just did the normal old input system way, then you won't necessarily know the indexing, because the indexing changes as a new controller maps in and out. The old input system, what often happens is I disconnect a controller, and let's say player 1 gets the controller disconnected, then now player 2 starts steering around player 1, because the index gets shifted.
Because they...
Yeah. So this just makes sure that we now have a nice little mapping. And because this is Kyle input is a reference type, we can store that on something else. And in the project, what we are storing here is we are simply creating an entity that stores that player controller. That means that we now have an entity with a player controller on it, and we can ask that player controller whether or not it's used. And this actually is the whole basis of how this project is set up in a way. And obviously, I'm gonna go into detail on how exactly I make that work, because there's a lot to this in the project. If you notice, just like looking at the scene alone, hopefully you guys can see this fairly okay.
Yeah, should be good.
But you can see 4 cameras here and the main camera. When I go into play mode, what actually gets moved around is just that camera and the 4 cameras here. And as soon as I hit start, I show one of those cameras. Interestingly,
Nice.
I also make sure that these are not shown by that camera.
Hidden from the other camera, yeah.
Yeah, or any game view camera. So these are always here, and they are obviously only rendering, but that's how that works. And then there's a render texture that you put on. You guys can dig into the code or ask after if you guys are interested in how that works. I then, wait on a certain amount of characters, and then enter. Something interesting happens there. It will figure out how to set up the split screen, because by default, you will note that we have these objects here, the cam player 1, 2, 3, 4. And obviously, one of the main problems that arise from having cameras normally is, how do you get a camera that matches the player? Normally, it's already annoying to get the camera from ECS, and now you have to get 4 different based on a player. For my simple use case, I chose a singleton approach just because it is a specific number. It's not a dynamic number, really, and 4 is such a low count. So all I have on it right here is a component called, and this is the same one from last time I was explaining about this project. It's the same component, but now I extended to which player it belongs to. And so if we go in here, on awake, simply make sure that it sets what it belongs to. And so now you can ask for all 4 and map them together. And we therefore can say, hey, this character has a player ID of 0, then okay, then you should use camera 0. And that continues. You guys can try and play around with this code to really get a feel for it. But the basic gist of it is if we read here, then on awake also sets this active as false, which is why it doesn't display when you start up the game. But let's say it did. What would happen then? Well, I first need to change the priority a little so we can see all the cameras. But then you can see then we already have the split screen setup. So by default, the split screen setup looks like this. And so my process for assigning the correct split screen setup based on how many players joined the game is just a matter of obviously counting how many players joined. And then if it was only 2, then these 2 simply needs to have these values here changed. So this one needs to have this value halved, and this you can see in the code in a second. But you just change around which of these are shown and which are enabled, and it's fairly easy to do.
How do you handle 3 characters? How do you lay out the cameras for that?
Well, I base this on trying to be fair to everyone, so therefore I can't give extra real estate to the third player, because obviously then they can just get the whole bottom.
Right.
So I simply and actually let me just show it because I can show it very easily. There you go, and then into the game. No user to see here. Lol. And so that works because I only have 3 cameras enabled now. All of the 5 other cameras, the one spinning around and the 4 preview cameras, they are all disabled at this point. So only 3 cameras are rolling. This one is set to this viewport, this one is set to that view, etc. And then I have a UI displaying in front of this section. If I didn't have a UI displaying in front of this segment, then I would see whatever was in the camera buffer last there, because nothing is trying to render to that part of the screen.
It'd just be like the frozen image, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. It would be essentially the frozen image, and most likely because you had it in the input menu when you joined the game, then it would be off the input menu before it went in, right?
And actually, real quick, this is just kind of a relevant question. Would it be possible to center the bottom camera?
What do you mean by center the bottom camera?
Like, so you have like the 2 here, and then instead of the one here, you move it kind of over to the center.
Indeed. And obviously that is a very similar code as when I take this and stretch it out so it works on the entire top surface. You would just have to make sure that the third camera, and you have access to that. Say the third camera actually should be assigned the values to map to this region. So that code path is very easy to add, and I'll show that in a second later. Then we don't really have that much more. This is the overview camera. These are the players, and they will get disabled by default. And then as soon as you enter play mode and you actually enter the game, then the X number of these will get re-enabled with the correct viewports. Then the only thing we have in the subscene right now is the environment itself, because again, this is a dots game, so we want all the physics and character controller and dots, rival character controller, everything to be in dots, because this is a dots project. So the environment is there, and then we have something called the player manager, which simply says every time you spawn a player, these are the prefabs that I expect to spawn. So if we remember from last time, we had a third-person character, which is the character itself, and then we have the orbit camera, which is the camera that moves around the orbit. I need to have both of these because if I just put the orbit camera underneath this one, then it would also have the parent relationship of doing that, which I want the orbit camera to live outside. I want to be in the top level.
Right. That's a cool way to handle that.
So, okay, that's set up. Then UI Palace is just all of these weird ones. You can even see the view frustums of the cameras. Game object, that was what I just had earlier, so that has nothing to do with the project. This is the last big workhorse of the scene, and it basically just tells some managed info about the project. So not only does it obviously show the UI document, so this is the UI displaying in the game, which is why it looks like that. Also, I should make sure to control set all the changes that I did. There you go. Control set. Then UI document has the UI document itself, but it also has references to the render texture that maps to each of the UI Palace drawing cameras. That way I can. That way I have a way to get the reference to those render textures. I could just as well have put them on a game object in here that had a baker that baked these on using a Unity object ref. But in this case, it was just easier for me to put all the managed references here. Then I have the player input description, which is a small little UI, because if you enter play mode start here, note how we have all these spawning.
Yep.
This is dynamic, which is really cool.
Right.
So if I were to add another action in here, it will actually add that here as well. Now, I'm not going to do this now, but it uses the name here to figure out that name, and then it will see, okay, is this a left stick? Well, if it's a left stick, then it just needs to draw one texture here. Otherwise, if it's a WASD, for instance, because it's a composite of 4, then it will look up the texture for each of these and then build a composite texture for this.
Did you have to do a lot of that kind of manually, though?
Not really, no.
Like
I mean, I did have to make.
Like it knows that like the W key maps to a certain asset or whatever.
No, that part I did have to do manually, and I guess I should also show that because that's a big part of this. If I go into the project is organized terribly right now. We have scripts in the root folder and so on. But if I go to the UI folder, not the UI toolkit folder, which both live in the root. This is brilliant. Then we see all the render textures. We see the style, but most importantly, we see these scriptable objects. So I used the scriptable objects here.
Cool.
So for the keyboard, I just say if you are looking for I, then find the keyboard I texture, etc. And then I do that for every one of these. These map to the name in the input system. And I also have it logging every time that this is requesting a draw that you don't have a texture for in the lookup. So that way you can start adding if you're missing any names here. But this basically just does a mapping. And then you have like, if it's a PlayStation 5, then left stick should return this, and start should return this texture.
Nice.
And then obviously you just have to have what is essentially a dictionary that maps together. And that was actually the last segment here.
Right.
That maps the name of a controller to what layout to use.
Okay.
So there's a way for you to get the input description of the controller you have that will say stuff like if it's an X input, which says that it's an Xbox controller. Or if it's hit wireless, then you can see this is actually a Switch Pro. There's also a way to get the manufacturer, but that is in a way unreliable, and you don't need the information. Right now I've made it as generic as need be. Then if I later on wanted to add more of the input description in there, like the manufacturer and the actual product name, because you can add the product name, then I can put that in here, and then the dictionary would obviously grow. But it's a fairly simple setup because you could just map to the same scriptable object.
Exactly. Yeah.
And yeah, so what this is just a UI element for that segment. A way for me to, in the UI, search for the icon and replace that with what I need, and search for the action name and replace the text with what I need.
Cool.
Yeah, so let's dig into some code. Let's finally look at some code. Now, I guess UI hook is the most interesting bit. So I mentioned earlier that we have the UI hook, which is this thing here. This is the one that has all the managed references. Mm-hmm. You can see the way that.
Just zoom in a couple clicks, please.
Yes, of course. Sweet. Let's do this as well. Then what you can see here is we essentially have a dictionary lookup here. I would recommend normally to put it's because you can't serialize the dictionary in Unity. So I just have like an array of the combination. And the way to look it up is link right now, but I really would recommend someone cache a dictionary and then create that dictionary in the wake. I was just lazy here. Otherwise, the main purpose of this is you really should not call UI hook instance that often. I still want the system to later on go and be the actual owner of most of the UI handling. And the reason for that is simply it helps out with dependency management. The big problem here is that there's a difference between when a scene loads and when a subscene loads and when a system is run. So in order for me to figure out when these references are valid to use, I just create an entity in the default world. And again, I generally recommend against the default gamer injection world because it immediately stops you from being able to use any sort of netcode project. It doesn't immediately stop you, but often it can harm making a netcode project because then you don't know the differentiation between what is should run in netcode and what should run on client.
Well, you actually can set the default game object injection world.
100%. The main issue here is simply my point here is simply that this will mean it's always gonna be often the client world is the default approach. There are some cases like if you have audio for each player, then that might cause issues. It's a little easier to look at the other way around.
Makes sense, yeah.
I did put everything inside one thing here because I did make this in a weekend for you guys to see. So sometimes it's nice to just have everything in the system. But we have the UI system, then we have the enter game mode menu system, and we have it's a long system, that one. And then we have the game start system.
Looks like it.
And the differentiation between that system is the UI system just sets up so we have some basic handling for the main menu and the UI. And then at some point you click the right buttons and then you are in the enter game menu. Once you're in the enter game menu, then you need to handle everything that has to do with remapping the controller, that code path we saw earlier on GitHub, and creating entities, etc. I'll go into detail about this later. And then at some point, you have made sure that everyone is ready and they press play and they're allowed to do so. Then game start system starts running because this entity here is created called isInGame. And so on start running starts and the main part of the game starts working. So that's the three systems. A quick glance at the overview. Now, I won't go into this too much. It basically just ensures that you press the start button in the main menu, and then it will not show that menu anymore. Instead, it will cast what is essentially an event. So right here, I'm using entities as events. So I'm spawning an enter game menu entity, calling out that, hey, you press this start button. So now you should start setting this up. So you did that. You press the start button, and this system starts working because this condition is met. And obviously, the system also has to store some state. That's great. And it also has to get a reference to the UI system that we had earlier, because that one has all the references and it has already pre-cached everything. So now I'm already in the nice place where I can say, and I probably should actually have a require for update saying it's dependent on the UI system. But I can pretty much expect that you can't press the UI button unless that happens, so it's fine. So I have the UI system and I can say, hey, I'm waiting for X number of players. I'm gonna display the enter game menu. So as soon as I enter have this event called, then it's this system that's responsible for making sure that that menu is displayed. And then I also start listening for events. So only when I am in that enter game menu, I'm starting to listen for events. And this is where we do what we saw earlier. Another thing that I also do here, which was not there the last time, is I do this little thing where I get the menu state that lives on this system. Mm-hmm. And the menu state stores the current state of our menu, which in this case is only these 8 booleans. it indicates, hey, in our menu, how many slots are currently occupied. This is because when you, let's say player 1 joins, then player 2 joins, and then 3, and then player 2 exits, then you still have 1 and 2 occupied, 1 and 3 occupied, but not the second slot.
Right.
And this indicates which of the slots have a player that's currently ready.
So then, like, if another player joined, then it knows that it could slot them into spot 2, basically, right?
Exactly. And that's what this function does. Claim first available spot. Just loops over and looks for the first available place to put it.
Yeah, you're using kind of a similar setup with the bool 4 that I know like Tobias uses quite a bit. He uses like vector 4 for kind of like balancing lookups where like if there's like, 2 players in the game, then it can kind of like do a lookup to see like how many enemies it should spawn.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So here we got the first available slot to us, and then I pair up the controller because now I'm confident that at the very least I have the amount of space available for a 5th player is not going to join, right? Do the same mapping I did earlier, and this is what I was talking about. Like now I can just create an entity that's going to be used later that stores the correct controller. So now I have an entity representing a user, because a user can only store which controller and which devices are attached to that user. We want additional information, so I'm using an entity to kind of represent additional user information. So that's what we have here. I created something that has an input tag, input puppet tag. I call them puppets, these little fake inputs. And there's a kind of reason that you want a separation from your input controller and your actual like in-game representation of the player. Because if the player dies, I still want the puppet to be available so you can like rejoin the game or stuff like that. You can still ask input events even though the player died. So I can't attach it to the player directly. I have to attach this little puppet. So that's what I do. I have a puppet that represented. I also gave it a name. And it also knows about the device, and it knows about the controller, and
So
it knows what.
Just to clarify, that basically always exists, and you're just like always kind of sending input to that, so it doesn't matter that the actual player may be respawning or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can actually put this controller reference on the player itself, and that's what I do in this here too. But the thing is, then your player dies, and maybe that you want to respawn it, then you still have the original controller reference, so that you can still re-put it on, right? And then last thing I need to have available to me is both the slot index and user index. And there's a difference between the user index and the slot index. The slot index, obviously, if player 1 joins 2, 3, and you have that hole in the middle that I was talking about earlier, then you have slot 1 and 3. But the user index would be user 1 and 2. And that's also the amount of players you would have, right? You would have player 1 and 2. You would have the amount of players equal to the amount of indices, input users. So that's why I need both of these, because if you look at the main menu, and I can quickly show that, I always want this player to be the red player, and I always want this player to be the black player, I guess, dark color, and then the cyan one is here. And if, say, this controller here drops out, then this player, I don't want, if I only had user index to work based off of, then right now, when I go to spawn my players, he would get assigned the black one. But that's not obviously what I want. I still want him to spawn under the user 2 and the player 2, but as slot 3 here, right? So that's why I need to store both. It's basically customization options that the slot index is usable for. So, okay, I now have a puppet. Obviously, at this point, I haven't set anything up so that I can actually, ready the player or not, and the player can drop out. Haven't set up anything of that kind. So that's what we're doing here. We're asking, hey, have you currently put in any player? And yeah, that this just matches the player, right? And also this input puppet tag, because there's two parts of this. A puppet should both have an initialization state where I register any events, and it should also have the main update where I just every frame update and do checking. So this enableable component is what I'm using here to say, hey, if this is true, which it is by default, then you can do your initialization. And then once the initialization is done, then turn this to false. It doesn't need any initialization anymore. Yeah, so looping over every player, setting some information up about that player, like for instance, the text below should now say not ready. And as soon as a player joins, obviously I also want all of this to happen. And like this texture should be reassigned. All of the textures in here should be set up. The text here should be set up. And this one should be updated. Like if I add a third player, I obviously want this to now say free.
Right.
So that's part of the initialization for each player. And this is also where I can do this little lookup saying, hey, could I please get all the textures, the texture scheme for this specific device that I'm currently looking at? So I'm setting up, I'm in the menu, press play. I just pressed a button on my keyboard. At that moment, I want to figure out what device was pressed and then look up the texture collection for that. So that's what I have here. I have all the textures related to that player. Then I can loop over every action on that player. And I'm going to show later why that's the case. I'm doing that. But the important bit is this clone tree. So that adds one of these segments here. And then I assign the correct texture and the correct text name for that, which I can ask the action about.
Yep.
And then I can get the texture from the texture lookup, get from action and device. People can obviously try and read this part if that's interesting, but I won't go into detail right now. Basically, there is just a mapping between the texture and what button is actually pressed, and that's what this does. And if that button, this action that you put in here, happens to be a composite button, so built up of 4 keys, then it will also manage building the correct texture for that. Based on this device. So, good.
Yeah.
We've done that. And this is just assigning the ready button so that this button also gets assigned. And I can just specifically call out here, player controller game menu ready button. And so let me go back to why I can loop over every action. When I just take the player controller, the one that we had as a reference earlier, and put on the puppet, then for each loop will naturally give back every action as part of that input controller. So every action that lives on this asset here. Every one of these. But it will also give me the game menu here. Enter game, ready, cancel. And the reason I have 2 is that as soon as I enter the game, I don't want people to accidentally start readying up because that's no longer available. So I'm going to disable the game menu. But I don't want to, in that menu, start showing the game menu because that also, doesn't make sense. Like all the button key maps for the menu. So that's what I'm skipping over here. Player controller, game menu. Check if the action map of the action you're currently looking at is the game menu of the controller. So
makes sense.
That way we're going to go. And that's pretty much it. We've updated the waiting text and we've said yes, we now have initialized that puppet. because we have. And what do we still need to do every frame? Well, we still every frame need to know, and let's go into the game again, whether someone pressed, not the start action here, which I just did, but we need to know if they pressed space in this case.
The ready button.
Yeah, and we also need to know if they pressed the start game button, and we also need to know if they pressed the exit button. So those 3 events, right? Also, I have a cat that is now laying on my keyboard. Oh my god, I can't exit the game if... There we go.
Good kitty.
Yeah. And now she's licking my finger. So this is the same loop as earlier. The only difference obviously being that we are also allowing... We're not actually checking if that input puppet tag is enabled or not. So okay, if you press the game ready button, this triggered only happens the first frame that is true. Then toggle the menu state of the player being ready, and I can get the available slot because I stored that, as we saw earlier, in the slot in user index. Then change the text between being ready or not based on what you just assigned, and update the waiting text. Same for enter game menu. I check if we have enough players. If not, then just don't do anything. Otherwise, keep going. And if it is the case that we have enough players ready, then don't display the enter game menu anymore because we're done displaying that, and then just call out the event is in game. If you press exit, then we need to do all of this, which I guess I can go into as well. It's simply just make sure to destroy the puppet entity because we don't need the puppet anymore if they exit. Resets the text. Make sure to not have any of the input buttons anymore, the ones that display here. And resets all of the slot player readiness and unpairs the device and removes the user, and then starts listening for an additional controller and updates the amount of players ready. Fairly simple code.
Yeah.
Then, all players are ready. All, enough of the total required players have joined, and all is set. We're in game. What happens then? Other than the display going away? Well, let's quickly look in the game. Start. Boom. Boom. We need something new to happen. We need the original cameras to go away, to be disabled. We need the entities to spawn, obviously. We need those entities that spawned to contain the correct player controller. They should also assign which camera they belong to so that the camera starts working. Obviously, the orbiting camera also needs to point to the player. And we need to assign the cameras that we did activate and disable the game menu action. So that needs to happen as soon as we press play. So this is all I needed for disabling all the existing cameras, like the overview camera along with all of the UI cameras. Just have a tag on those cameras and then delete them. And there's already a way of getting all the cameras. And then I get some of this data. People are allowed to ask. I won't go into detail. Now, then we have to loop over every single one of those puppets. So this loops over the puppets. And then we just do, and remember this is happening in on-start running. So this only gets called once when the first time that is in game is created. So is in game, that entity is there for the whole game session. If you were to destroy that game, then you should probably have an on-stop running that makes sure to stop the game, right? Then, okay, we loop over every puppet that we want to spawn. So if we have 2 players that are ready to join, even if they have slot index 1 and 3, then that's what we get. then we disable their game menu so they don't start exiting out of the game and disconnecting and everything. We make sure that we get the camera, the correct one, and activate it based on the user's index. So again, this is going to be 1 and 2, even though you have a player at slot 1 and 3. Because that's how user indexes work. They get automatically remapped based on whether or not there's a user. And then I have players, the amount of players ready. This is just a singleton that I can get based on the menu state. See, okay, if it's a 2-player game, then for camera number 1, well, at index 0, right? Then you should set it to this full region here. So this just, X 0, so it starts there, and then it's half of the screen, so it's
half in the Y. Yeah.
Half of the Y, full width, and put it at one location, and this should be put at the other location, at the other Y location, 0 and half. Right, so these will in total fill out the whole screen.
So
and in this case,
basically by default, you have it as a 4 screen, but if there's only 2 players, then you just stretch them across the top and bottom, right?
Exactly. And I could also have a case 1 if I wanted to allow for 1 player game.
Yeah. And then so that would also be where you would set if you wanted to center that bottom camera, right? In the case 3, I mean.
Exactly. Case 3 here, then I would say when player index equals 2, assign the cam for player rect to the right value, right? Yes. And obviously if you were to do that, then make sure that you have some UI that you can enable that has text, has something to display on both sides. Otherwise, you're going to get what was already in the camera buffer at that time.
Right. Yeah.
Put
some little black bars there.
You can, of course, also have just a dummy camera that shows some black text that displays into the voice and has a low priority. Then it will be drawn in the background. Also, I got my cat.
Yeah, saying, is your cat trying to type some comments there or something?
No, that was me.
Oh.
Oh, obviously not. Yeah, then obviously I got the singleton representing the objects to spawn every time a player spawns. So then we can loop over that. So this is just a buffer I got here. Get the singleton buffer of spawn on player spawn, and then turn it into an entity array. So I can loop over that. And then I obviously have to instantiate the given object that I want to spawn. So I will, in the beginning, spawn the character. Yeah. I think, isn't that the case? Yes, otherwise the other thing won't work. Yeah, the character spawned before the orbit camera. I do have that dependency. Because we spawn one of the entities, and then we check if that entity that spawned is a third-person character data. If that's the case, then I should make sure to that like player 0 obviously should spawn at a different location than player 1, so that they don't overlap physically. Otherwise, they start whacking out physics-wise.
Right.
So that's what I'm doing here. Then I'm also making sure that when the animator gets spawned, I mentioned this in the last episode, how you set up so that when a player spawns, it gets it also spawns when a player entity spawns, then it also spawns a game object representing it. The thing I'm doing here is simply make sure that when that spawns, it spawns with the correct color. And that's why I have put in the slot index here. So basically give me the look of being in slot number 2 or slot number 0. And then the last important bit is that when I spawn a player, I've already made sure that that player on it has a controller reference. You just need to make sure that it's assigned, and that's what I'm assigning here. So every player still has their own reference to a controller reference, but you also have the puppet in case you ever kill the player and need to be able to retrieve that. Then now we've spawned the character, and therefore this is valid. Then we spawn the next one, which is the orbit camera, and make sure that the orbit camera gets the correct user index so that it's matched to the correct managed camera. And then we also make sure that the character knows about it. So the orbit camera starts moving around the correct character. That's what this does. That's why we needed the reference to the camera data to begin with. So this basically just makes sure that the character gets assigned the camera that we just spawned. And then we do that for every player and loop over again. And that's pretty much everything about joining the game. Obviously, there are some extra stuff in here, like is in-game. If you look for it, there are some other usages. Where is it also used? Well, it's used in the third-person player input system, because we only want player input to start working when the game is running.
Right.
So I just wait for it here. And that's also the first time that I lock the mouse, because I do want in-game to use the mouse. And then it's just like the reason that the players move around is because they are, like last episode, they are driven by third-person player inputs. And I can get the controller reference for the given player and just start reading some values of that player. And this is the entire thing that drives the players moving around with their respective controllers. And that's it. Everything else has to do with how the character controller works. But I think if we want to go into detail on how the character controller works, then we should have a specific episode on that.
Yeah. No,
I think it's... Yeah.
I was just going to say, I mean, it always is amazing when you're dealing with multiplayer, especially local multiplayer. Like, there's just so many little things that you need to consider to make sure that, everything lines up for each player and things are all kind of like separated, even though they're all still running on the same machine. So yeah, there's just a lot of small little details that you need to work out. So it's always good to just kind of, consider those different things.
Yeah. I mean, and for me, the simplest way to think about it is just to kind of guard clause things with this. Because then you can make sure that one part of it is set up correctly, and then you can set up the next part correctly, and then kind of segment it. Because you always are going to kind of have your join screen. And so that input starting screen I have, there's no reason that couldn't be exchanged for like a netcoded multiplayer also having that join in the session. And then you have two of those. But if you notice, then the inter-game menu one can still work, right? There's nothing that really... I mean, there's a few things that might prevent it a little, but it won't take you a massive refactor to take this join game session system into one that supports a netcoded multiplayer version.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's probably time for some questions, both if you have any and obviously if Chad has any.
Yeah, we can go ahead and switch over to this. I don't think I have any off the top of my head, although I'll think about some if I do. Do you just want to point out you did showcase that inline stack alloc? I know you'd showed this off in a...
all the time.
Yeah, you'd showed this off in a episode previously, and I think this is a really cool thing that is in there. So yeah, why don't you tell people what that's all about?
Sure. I mean, funnily enough, I was also the one that edited this because I was very annoyed because whenever someone does this pattern, and I kind of sadly had to do it myself too. If we go up a little, there's a quite common pattern of I'm just gonna create the entity. Not create it with the right archetype, I'm just creating the entity, and then I'm gonna afterwards add all the components. That pattern is kind of bad because it means that you created an archetype that is empty, then you added a component to it, so you moved the chunk and the archetype and created a new one, and then you added a new component, and that happens over again X amount of times that you call add a component. There's no batching happening here. And by the way, there's no batching happening if you were to use an entity command buffer instead. So this is bad no matter what. You're not supposed to use add component multiple times. Instead, you should ideally create it the right way. The problem is, before you were able to do this, the way that you would do it and still support burst, and in this case, you technically don't, because a lot of the code is managed, so I don't have to support burst. But it's also just a nice default to go to. If I were to write this in the non-bursted way, then sure, I could do create entity, type of input puppet tag, input puppet tag, and then continue that way. And that works because it's using the params feature, and the params feature is array-based, and so it has to be managed. And so this approach to the API could never actually work in a bursted way. But spans exist, and if you simply change this API to use a span instead, then stack alloc becomes available to you. Because when you do stack alloc, this syntax here, something kind of wacky happens. And to the people that haven't tried it before, var components here. This is going to be a pointer, a component type pointer, and it's also going to error on me because it says it needs to be constructed in an unsafe context.
Right.
Which also means I have to turn the entire project unsafe. That's not what I want.
Yeah, you got to enable.
So
for the
instead,
assembly.
if I simply say span, or read-only span for that matter, component type, then the error goes away because it knows that this is only going to be used in a safe context. A span is a ref struct, and so it's only available in this scope, and so it's available in the stack, and therefore it's not unsafe anymore. And I can pass this.
Is that something that you had kind of figured out? Like you were basically building off of how the span is kind of how the span of component type is already set up, or is that something that you had to kind of like do on your own, like as a new thing to enable the stack alloc feature?
The stack alloc feature is just built into C#.
Yes, but like using it with the span of component types in a safe context, I guess.
No, well, the casting mechanic, is that what you're talking about?
Basically, yeah.
Okay, so that's actually like a C#. It's fairly niche. I think I learned about it somewhere. I can't remember where.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious if it was some niche thing that you figured out, or if it was like something that you had to kind of like do to.
No, it's definitely a niche thing that I figured out because I often, because of all the source generation I've had to do, I just end up naturally taking in a lot of C# syntax and C# language semantics over time, and so this is one of the cases that I know about where it has one default behavior, and then you can override that default behavior, and it's simply because spans didn't exist at the time that they added that feature. So that's why it's using the wrong default. It's using the unsafe default. Now, interestingly, it does mean that casting, that explicit casting operation, it also works when you pass in to, a type like this. It will automatically figure out that this is valid in a safe context. So that it doesn't have to be you save it in a variable first and then pass it in. You can also just do this. Because here's the other thing. Before being able to pass in a span, you would have to do this part yourself. You would first call create archetype, and then pass that into create entity. And how do you create an archetype without this way of doing it? Well, let's look at create archetype. Well, you would have to create a native list, because that's the only valid way to create a. Let's look at the underlying thing here. A pointer with a count. So either like a native list or a native array. But native list is often nicer because a native list you can actually add multiple component types in. So you create a native list with multiple component types in, just list them out because it has the same syntax. And then you do as array, and then you pass that in, because we do have a version of this that takes a native array, the create archetype, and then you pass that into create entity. So that's like 4 calls in order to do what I'm doing now.
Just, yeah, in just
and
one,
that would
yeah.
cause a temporary allocation still. It would cause an allocation, whereas this is now using stack alloc.
Love it.
So yeah, that's that feature.
Look at that. In the time it took you to explain that, Chad already put it in his project.
Nice.
That's sweet.
No, I just wanted to go into detail because this to me is a very cool feature.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. Still don't have access to system runtime compiler services. Skip locals init attribute for use outside of burst.
I'm sadly aware, but I also am fairly sure that that attribute does work if you just re-implement it yourself. Like most of the wacky attributes that is C# syntax based is just looking for the name. So for instance, if you look at unmanaged callers only convention, which is a very difficult thing that most people don't know what is, then it has a specific type saying if a function is cdecl, and it's just looking for if that type name has that type name, so the namespace and then the type. It doesn't actually look if it's in the correct assembly. So actually, we have that in entities as well, where we do a similar trick. There's something called mono-p invoke. Mono-p invoke. Look, it's defined inside Unity entities because it's not defined by the runtime itself, which it normally would be. So we just make sure that we create an attribute that has that specific name.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Never knew that. That's really interesting.
Any other questions?
I have a quick question. Would you actually just be able to show how you use that puppet to like set input on a given player?
Sure.
Like for in-game input?
What do you mean for in-game input?
Because that's what you're using the puppet for, right? Is to like...
Yeah, okay. So let me quickly get in the game, then I can show how the players look.
Yeah.
Entity-wise, because that's probably easier. So if I look at the player entities, there's a player. Waiting.
Anytime.
That took some time. Then on here, there should be a player controller reference. A controller reference here. So every single player has a controller reference. And when I go to make my player characters work, I just use that controller reference directly. I don't think about the joining system mechanic. So it's just up to the enter game, the thing that creates the characters, to just make sure that they get assigned that. Or if you had like they get killed and they respawn mechanic, then the respawn system is supposed to remap the controller reference again. So I just use the puppet and then move the value that is on the puppet over to the controller reference. And so if we go back in here, we're already looping over every single puppet that we're trying to spawn. And when we're looping over every single puppet that we're trying to spawn, and we've spawned the character, which we spawn the character there, then this is the part that makes sure that it gets assigned the correct controller. Because the puppet knows the controller.
Right. Yeah, that's a nice way to do that. Because then you don't have to worry about remapping it every time a player gets respawned or something like.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for showcasing that. It was a super interesting look at doing a whole local multiplayer setup in Dots. And again, most of these kind of core concepts, they work for any local multiplayer game. But again, you were just kind of showing us how to do it within a dots context, which is super cool there. All right, so we can go ahead and move over to our dynamic allocations of the week, the fun things to share with the community. So, Danny, what do you got for us this week?
Oh, I'm still sharing my screen. Awesome. So those little characters are actually from a guy on YouTube. He's quite a cool guy. He also works at Unity, funnily enough, called Mix and Jam. And this is available on the what?
Said shout out Andre.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is on the asset store. It's also available on GitHub. It's free to use for everyone. It's very nice. And the YouTube channel has a really fun concept. I used to watch it a lot, and sometimes still watch it.
Yeah, he has some awesome videos. He hasn't. I don't think he's really posted in a while. I know he's been super busy with work stuff, but
yeah, exactly. But the concept of his videos are generally trying to implement a specific game concept, a feature
from
in
a game. Yeah,
exactly. So, okay, how do you reprint the link between worlds wall merge? So having a character move around a wall and being able to pop out of it. How do you create that? And then it goes into details on how you do it and all the steps you went through, from animating it to creating the character and setting it up, and also some of the code snippets. It's really well edited together.
I really like that the Mario Star Launch one, the Mario Galaxy Star Launch one. Scroll down.
Oh yeah, that one is really cool.
I remember this one showed me a trick that he uses in a bunch of his videos, where he uses like the Cinemachine track. Yeah, this right here. He uses the Cinemachine track to have the player follow that track. So you can use the Cinemachine track for more than just, making the camera follow that. Because I think this was kind of before like Unity's native spline package was in there and everything. So yeah, it's a cool little trick.
Yeah, I just love this. Like, this is so cool to see.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not dots, but his channel is a lot of it is about learning those concepts.
Yeah, it's about like design, adding effects to make it look, real, professional, polished, and everything.
And juicy, yeah, exactly. And it's really good at explaining that. And you can take that directly into dots. There's nothing stopping you from doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's my dynamic allocation. Definitely go watch him.
To me. So the one that I'm going to share is this little thing called Disk Voyager. Danny, have you heard of this at all by chance?
No, I don't think so.
So came across this on Twitter. I'll show you this guy's Twitter because that's where he kind of primarily shows most of his progress on this. But it's basically a replacement for Windows Explorer. Because like he's showing like using Windows Explorer and like you're like searching for something, it like takes forever. All the thumbnails take forever to load. And yeah, if you remember, I showed like a couple weeks ago a little like registry hack that you could use to like bring back some of the performance of the File Explorer. But it's like ridiculous how like just something as simple as a File Explorer like is so slow and like on the Windows machine. So this is basically a complete replacement for this called Disk Voyager. So here it is right here. You'll see that it's like everything is immediately responsive.
That's very cool.
You can open up all kinds of tabs, have like separate windows. Everything is like super quick. There's a lot of stuff. There's like, the navigation panes and tabs, different context menus. You can do multiple selections, batch renaming. It's a really cool thing. It's not available yet. You can sign up for the email list where you can get invited to the initial like alpha tests, I guess, when they're available. And then also put up his Twitter because that's kind of where he's sharing the kind of primary updates of this all. But this is something that I'm like super very much looking forward to, something that I got my eye on. You'll just kind of see like based off of like the actually I'll just show his Twitter here. You'll see that the other people that follow this guy, Ryan Fleury, Jonathan Blow, the Cherno, Case Muratori, basically Brian Will even.
Oh, nice.
Basically all of the
performance data-oriented
Yeah,
people.
the performance-aware type programming crowd. So this is basically all made with just raw C, and so it's like, yeah, super high performance and everything. By the way, this was his April Fool's joke here. Finally got my hands on this book. I think I'm going to rewrite my file manager in Rust, now adhering to clean code principles.
You should have taken it all the way. Obviously, Java. That's
Yes, Java. But yeah, I would highly recommend people follow this. And yeah, he's always showing like new kinds of features that he's adding in here. And it's just like, oh, I want to get my hands on this so bad.
Yes.
Cool. So that is the dynamic allocation for the week. So then, yeah, we can just kind of go ahead and start to close things out here. Real quickly, do just want to thank our supporters over on Patreon. Again, you can support us over on patreon.com/TurboMakesGames, where we have a lot of cool updates and bonus videos for you over there. And real quick, I just want to thank the supporters at the CPU register tier, which is the highest support tier we have. So thank you to eCool for your support there. Really goes a long way, because again, we are just a small operation over here. So with that, we can go ahead and close out the show. Hope you all enjoyed it here today. Danny, you got any exciting plans for the weekend here?
Sleeping?
get
I haven't
some
done that all
rest.
week.
Yeah,
I definitely want to try that. I
telling
haven't
me
tried
that
it in a
you've
while.
been had a lot of things going on at work, and so I think we're all very eager to see those things that you're working on as well.
Any good best coding practice? Oh, there's a good question.
Yeah, we can go ahead and hit this before we close out.
There's actually a official guide on that, which is the
Are you talking
Unity
about
best.
the one from the Unity Learn platform?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a really good resource. Yeah, because it just kind of goes over what data-oriented design is, how you should kind of approach data-oriented design, and yeah, it's a lot of kind of it's more theoretical, I guess, in a lot of ways, but there's still some like really good tips and tricks in there that certainly helped me when I was kind of trying to get better at dots and everything.
Exactly. And obviously also some just general good learning resources.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it just kind of tells you about what dots is and everything like that. And actually, I'll even go ahead and post this full thing here, because this includes that Unity Learn resource documentation, as well as a bunch of other things that are available through Unity, and some of the community resources, some games that are using dots in production. So yeah, there's a lot of good things in there. So yeah, I would definitely recommend checking out all those.
Yes.
But yeah,
it also has nice profiling information about different ways to do things in entities, and why you should go do one over another from a performance standpoint.
Right. Okay, well, yeah, with that, so we can go ahead and close out our show. So, yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us here today. It was great to hang out with you all as always. Thanks for the good questions and everything. Hope you enjoyed this. We'll go ahead and close out episode 11 of the Hot Path Show, and we'll be back next week. It'll be myself and Tobias. Again, it'll be right after Tobias launches his game, Just Read the Instructions. So go check that out on Steam, because again, it's coming out on Wednesday, April 10th. And then, so yeah, we're going to be talking all about it next week. Probably going into a lot of the code. And yeah, if you have any questions and want to see how things were done in his project, feel free to come hang out and ask them. So yeah, we will see y'all next week. Take care, everybody.
Yes.